Hey, I'm Matt from Hidden Machine, and this game right here is Obsidian. Depending on where you look on the internet, it was released on either December 31st of 1996 or January 10th of 1997. Now, this game received very positive reviews upon launch. You can see here, according to GamePen, Obsidian is the first to do everything that Myst did, only much better. Even today, over 25 years later, there are still a lot of people online praising the game and sharing fond memories of playing it back in the day, but until fairly recently, it was almost impossible for a lot of people to play on modern hardware. In August of 2023, Obsidian received an official re-release on Zoom Platform and Steam, thanks in large part to the folks at Zoom Platform, who specialize in bringing old games to modern hardware DRM-free. Acknowledgement also has to go to Eric Lasota and other people who work on Scum VM, which is a program that brings classic adventure games to modern hardware. So to celebrate, Hidden Machine is bringing you a look back at Obsidian. We're going to talk about how the game was made, what it accomplished, how it was forced into relative obscurity, and how it came back to be available for players today. I had the opportunity to speak to a couple people involved directly in making the game, the producer, Matthew Fassberg, and the lead designer and game director, Adam Wolff. But before we go much further, I want to say thank you to our supporters over on Patreon. It was through their support that we were able to pick up this mostly sealed copy of Obsidian to show off in this video today, and if you are in a position to help the channel grow, even $1 a month goes a very long way to helping us do what we do here on Hidden Machine. So there's a link down there. Thanks to everyone who's been supporting the channel, and let's get into Obsidian. In the game, you take on the role of a scientist named Lila Kurlans. It's the year 2066, and Lila and her partner, Max Powers, have spent the better part of the last 15 years working on a project called Ceres. In the world of Obsidian, war and pollution have ravaged Earth, leaving large parts of the planet uninhabitable. Ceres is a satellite that uses nanotechnology to identify and repair damage to Earth's atmosphere. After 100 days in orbit, Ceres switches over from human control to machine control, allowing AI to run the satellite. To celebrate, Lila and Max head out to vacation in a remote bit of wilderness. Once there, they find themselves completely cut off from civilization. Normally, they would be able to maintain an internet connection, but curiously, their devices can't connect to any network. However, a real break from worrying about Ceres and all of the struggles they faced getting it up and running is something that the couple severely needs, so they see their isolation as a bit of a mixed blessing. Both Lila and Max have an almost parental type of connection to the satellite, and seeing it switch over to machine control felt a bit like sending their child off into the world to make its own decisions. They both feel a degree of anxiety and guilt, fearing that as soon as they'll take time off for themselves, something will go wrong with Ceres, and they won't be immediately available to help. Still, they need time to recharge, so they try to make the best out of their situation. Early on in the trip, Lila and Max discover a strange structure made out of an unfamiliar type of black rock. Within days, the structure, which the couple dubs Obsidian, grows from 1 foot tall to around 50 feet tall. One morning, Lila steps out of her tent and hears a loud crash, followed by the sound of Max screaming. She ascends a nearby hill and sees Max's hat on the ground in front of Obsidian. Lila then sees herself in the impossibly smooth surface of the structure, and suddenly it opens. Lila steps through the portal and is swept away into a strange new realm. This is where the game really picks up, and from here on out, players will work through a series of mazes and puzzles, all operating on a sort of dream logic. We'll get into more of the story and the symbolism on display here in a bit, but first I want to give some background on Rocket Science Games, the developers behind Obsidian. Rocket Science Games was a company started on the premise of merging Silicon Valley with Hollywood. The November 1994 issue of Wired magazine featured a cover story on Rocket Science, crowning them the first digital supergroup. Sales of CD-ROM drives were on the rise, and games were starting to become larger and more ambitious than had ever been possible before. That Wired article states, "As the market matures, game theorists have devised a new strategy, grafting Silicon Valley engineering and gameplay with Hollywood production and special effects. The results, they hope, are games increasingly more theatrical in presentation and appearance, movies, in effect, to control and move around in." The supergroup consisted of people like its initial co-founders, Steve Blank and Peter Barrett, who previously worked together at Supermac, which at the time was the largest producer of hardware peripherals for Macintosh computers. And as an interesting side note, Steve Blank has a background in military technology. He focused on electronic warfare while serving in the US Air Force in the 1970s, and later worked as a training manager for a company called ESL, which played a large role in developing stealth technologies. Peter Barrett invented Cinepack, which was one of the first video compression tools, and it allowed CD-ROMs to utilize full-motion video. He also invented Video Spigot, an early Mac-compatible video capture card that allowed users to convert different video sources into QuickTime files. Seeing that the gaming industry would be moving full force towards CD-ROM, starting up Rocket Science Games seemed like a natural move for Barrett and his partners. Early investors in the project included companies like Sega. Also on board at the start was Ron Cobb, an artist who had worked on films like Star Wars, Alien, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Back to the Future, and many more. Brian Moriarty and Dave Fox were also present. Moriarty designed titles like Beyond Zork for Infocom and Loom for LucasArts. Dave Fox was also previously at LucasArts, where he worked on a bunch of games, including Zack McCracken and Maniac Mansion. There was Michael Backus, who was fresh off of being a display graphics supervisor on the incredibly successful Jurassic Park. Mark Mullen joined the team after serving as a producer at Industrial Light and Magic. Rich Cohen also came over from ILM, and he has digital effects credits on Terminator 2 and Total Recall. Matthew Fassberg was another early hire for the company, and I asked him what it was like to join the Rocket Science team.
For the first while, it was very exciting. It was exciting for almost all of it. First of all, you had a lot, again, the game industry was just really starting, the video game industry was just starting to launch. So a lot of people were excited to have the opportunity to work on something like this. I will point out that while we were making this game, or while we were starting Rocket Science, Doom came out, and it was multiplayer on the SGI machines we had at the company, and we were blown away. And late at night, we'd be done at work with 9 o'clock, and at midnight, you'd see 20 of us leave, having played Doom. There was a lot of excitement around where we saw gameplay going.
Adam Wolff was another person who joined the team in 1994.
Well, sure. I wore my Rocket Science t-shirt today because, for me, sort of working at Rocket Science and coming to the Bay Area at this time was, it was literally a dream come true. I was graduating college and I read the very first issue of Wired magazine, and I didn't really understand even a lot of what was in it, but I just knew I wanted to be part of whatever was happening in the Bay Area in the early 90s. And Rocket Science really was what was happening. It was the hottest thing. So I think, we wrote that thing on the back of the box, like, we hope you, enjoy it, playing it as much as we enjoyed making it. But that's really what I remember about it, is like how great it was to work with all these talented people. Matt Fassberg is one of my best friends. My wife she was my first boss at Rocket Science, the office manager, still the boss, of course. But so many of my best friends in the whole world come from this time.
There were a bunch of other incredibly talented people who joined the company early on. The capital that the founders were able to raise gave them the opportunity to really handpick some of the best talent available at the time.
As a producer at that time, the game world was just starting, and even the animation world was just launching. And I and the company gave people a lot of first chances who ended up being rock stars in that world. We had an art director named Alex Laurent, who went on to be an art director at ILM and did amazing visual work on multiple films you've seen, Mummy films, all kinds of stuff. And then I hired a guy who had not animated at all. He was a painter and a friend of a friend. His name is Richie McBride. He worked in this game for a couple of years. He's been nominated for Academy Award for animation and art direction. You know, he's very good. And then there was another guy we hired. His name was Jay Schuster, and he went on to work at Pixar, and he designed the little robot, the little square robot. I can't remember the name of the movie. A lot of people that worked in this game. These were people in technical, like designing cars and very technical drawing and digital work that had an amazing opportunity to let their creativity go. I mean, now we think about it because there's a zillion game companies and a zillion games. But at the time, there weren't that many opportunities for super technical people to also have an opportunity to do very creative stuff. So it did, in fact, merge the Silicon Valley and Hollywood idea and bring a lot of interesting people in, that many of which I stayed in touch with, who did amazing work afterwards.
The Wired magazine cover story on Rocket Science Games gives us a very in-depth look at their ambitions, and honestly, at times, it comes off as rather headstrong. Peter Barrett is quoted as saying, "I started to think about an entirely new interactive experience using the elements of film and visual literacy and the craft of storytelling. I saw these guys at Sega using Cinepack and not taking advantage of its capabilities, producing bad graphics and dumb stories. And I knew that there were people who could use it to full advantage, guys like Bruce Leak and the QuickTime team at Apple, and people at Industrial Light and Magic. Somehow I knew I had to get them together with guys like Brian Moriarty and Dave Fox, who had made some of my all-time favorite games, and see what would happen." The company was utilizing its own proprietary game development suite called Game Science, which consisted of two main programs, Game Composer and Game Compiler. Through Game Composer, users could generate simplified but playable sketches of games, even without any programming knowledge. Then, in a process that Barrett compared to painting in Photoshop, users could build on those sketches to add video, graphics, and other elements. Game Compiler would then take those games that were made in Game Composer and compile them for different platforms, like the PC or Sega CD. Barrett used his explanation of game science to throw another jab at Sega, saying, "A company like Sega would spend 2 to 3 times what we do to produce a similar title. Rather than spend a lot of money making a game from scratch, we put money up front on technology that we'll use again and again." These references to Sega overspending and telling dumb stories with bad graphics strikes me as odd, considering the fact that Sega was part of a $12 million investment in Rocket Science Games. In contrast, executive producer Mark Mullen sounds a bit more reserved in the article, but still hopeful for the company's future. He stated, "We don't claim we're making a revolutionary advance in game making, but we're moving in a logical progression, just taking a couple of steps ahead in terms of tools and talent and production methodology." The Wired cover story was written before Rocket Science had actually released any games, and it offered a few counterpoints to the hype surrounding the studio, pointing out that while they had some good tech and some good talent, they didn't actually have any games to show for it. 2 titles were set to release in late 1994. Right around the time that issue of Wired would be hitting newsstands. These games were Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, the Second Cataclysm, and Loadstar, The Legend of Tully Bodine. The Wired article had Peter Barrett promising that these games would be fast-paced adventures with compelling stories and high-end graphics. And he hoped that the games would reflect the sophistication of their young creators. Unfortunately, neither Loadstar or Cadillacs and Dinosaurs really connected with the public. Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, the second Cataclysm, is a sort of on-rails shooter. I'm showing the Sega CD version here, but it was later ported to PC. You use the D-pad to aim your crosshairs, but doing so also steers your car. Somewhat surprisingly, the controls are pretty smooth and responsive. You use your shotgun to blast away obstacles in front of you while you proceed through a maze. As you play, a clock ticks down from 60 minutes. Hurting or killing wildlife will cause time to run out faster, but the clock can be slowed by doing things like shooting poachers, who explode in a large blood splatter, accompanied by an abbreviated version of the Howie scream. These interactions with the poachers directly conflict something that was mentioned in that Wired article. At the time, Mortal Kombat was all the rage, but it seemed like some folks at Rocket Science found that level of violence to be somewhat lowbrow. Peter Barrett is quoted as saying that in both Loadstar and Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, you can't shoot people, only inanimate objects like robots and rocks. It's the difference between a B slasher flick and Terminator 2. Personally speaking, while I understand the difference between something like Sleepaway Camp and Terminator 2, Terminator 2 featured plenty of people not only being shot, but also gruesomely impaled, beaten to death, and exploded. Regardless, the jungle portion of the game persists for the first 6 chapters, meaning that players are subjected to 6 nearly identical looking stages, with each one being a maze. You'll regularly be faced with branching paths, but consistently choosing the right one is something that can only be done through trial and error. The last 3 chapters move to a first-person view, as the protagonists ride a minecart through another maze. This time, there are some indicators letting you know that you're on the right path, but it's no less tedious than the first portion of the game. Unfortunately, Second Cataclysm doesn't really live up to the sort of Hollywood meets Silicon Valley hype that preceded it. Perhaps the license for this game was acquired in hopes to capitalize on the dinosaur craze of the early 90s, sparked by Jurassic Park. Cadillacs and Dinosaurs began as a black and white comic called Xenozoic Tales, first published in 1987. The book was written and drawn by Mark Schultz. From 1990 to 1991, Marvel began reprinting the books in full color, this time under the title of Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. While Xenozoic Tales continued sporadically through 1996, the Cadillacs and Dinosaurs name was licensed and used to create several works that Mark Schultz wasn't directly involved in. These included a Saturday morning cartoon, a new series of comics published by Topps, and 2 video games. The first was an arcade game from Capcom, which I found to be an above-average beat-em-up, and the second was Second Cataclysm by Rocket Science Games. Second Cataclysm does feature some sparse animation, but it's not the same animation or character designs featured in the cartoon. The characters here are more true to their original comic book designs, and the majority of the cutscenes feature still images of comic-style art slowly being panned over to mimic movement. However, when it comes to full motion video, their second release, Loadstar, The Legend of Tully Bodine, knocks it out of the park. The game features a fair amount of live-action, full-motion video, telling the tale of a space trucker named Tully Bodine. The game stars some familiar faces like Ned Beatty and Michael J. Anderson, and despite the relatively low-resolution video capabilities of the Sega CD, I think that this game looks great. There's an option in the menu to see some 3D models of various enemies, along with a spoken description of each one. However, the gameplay itself is barely discernible from Cadillacs and Dinosaurs. Loadstar is another on-rails shooter, You move your crosshairs with the D-pad, and you use one button to blast enemies, while another button is used to switch paths whenever you come to a junction point. Like in their previous game, each of the 3 levels offered here are mazes, although this time around, you always have a compass to help keep you on track. Some reviewers at the time found the path switching mechanic to be unresponsive, which was definitely the case for my playthrough, but at least that led to me seeing this awesome death scene. While both of these games are infinitely more functional than many other FMV games, the consensus is that neither one was especially fun to play.
We got a wake-up call when we submitted one of our first games, I think Loadstar, to Sega for like their sign-off, basically, you know, for on their console. And they barely let us ship. You know, they were like, okay, we'll let you guys ship, but they just sort of said like, look, the gameplay here is not that compelling. And, you know, Loadstar was like sprites kind of flying around on the screen, and then you had a cursor. The cursor is influenced by the motion of the camera. So, you know, there was like this dynamism to it. But it just wasn't that interesting. You know, it would be like a pretty good cutscene, you know, with like really high production value, and then you're like back in your ship, like basically moving your cursor around the screen. And I think it became clear that like the gameplay was much more important than the visuals in games in general, and in these games in particular. There's just one kind of funny anecdote I have from Rocket Science, which was that you know, we were all into these streaming games, but the most popular game at Rocket Science, bar none, was Virtua Fighter. You know, which is this very crude 3D, like the opposite of what we were building, like no story whatsoever, just like total interaction. And, you know, because it was like one of these sort of 90s office environments, we'd all get around and play. We had a big tournament at one point. So I think, you know, the writing was on the wall, but it took a little while for us to read it.
In 1995, Rocket Science released Wingnuts: Battle in the Sky, which was another FMV-based on-rails shooter. According to a 1997 article on the making of Obsidian, all 3 of these games bombed miserably, moving fewer than 20,000 units each. While 20,000 units might not seem like a small number, considering the budgets and investments that went into these games, they were definitely not meeting expectations.
The disconnect between the game designers, who's David Fox, very good, Brian Moriarty, these guys were good game designers. And they were really met with, hey guys, we can't make that much game because it needs to look this good. And they were like, game players actually don't care that much how good it looks. They want great gameplay. And I learned working how true that actually is, but it became, there was some within the company battles around what to focus on and how to satisfy both aspects of what the company said they were going to be.
But the company had plenty of irons in the fire, even at the start. That Wired article makes mention of a future project that the team was referring to as the Obsidian Tower Chakra game. Peter Barrett said, "It'll be sort of like Dante meets Lewis Carroll in a large black monolith. It has references out of Indian mythology, and the object is to rise up through higher and higher levels of consciousness. This project would eventually be released as Obsidian." Now, we're setting the scene for Obsidian's development, but real quick, just because someone in the comments is bound to mention it, Elon Musk did work as a programmer on those first 2 Rocket Science games. A 2023 interview with Peter Barrett in the Australian Financial Review said that Barrett gave Elon Musk his first job, with the article stating that Musk wrote low-level code for some of the popular Rocket Science releases, which seemed like odd phrasing to me. If I learned anything about Rocket Science over the course of making this video, it's that those games were tragically unpopular, and my attempts to figure out how much Elon Musk actually contributed to those games had me coming back with inconclusive results. An April 1995 interview with Michael Backus mentioned 2 rocket science games that were being worked on at the time. One was referred to as a World War I fighter game, which became Wingnuts. The second game is referred to as a spiritual adventure game called The Presidium. While I wasn't able to confirm it, I believe that The Presidium was an early title for Obsidian, and the spiritual themes line up with the description that Peter Barrett had given the project a year earlier. These themes of spirituality aren't as dominant in the final game as you might think based on these early descriptions. While there is definitely a sense of moving through higher and higher levels of consciousness, the game deals with a variety of themes, including free will, environmentalism, global politics, creativity, artificial intelligence, and many more. The prevalence of so many heavy themes was an indicator of the changing strategies being employed at Rocket Science Games after the poor performance of their first 3 titles. The April 1995 interview with Michael Backus was published by Wired, and it was presented as a conversation between him and Ron Martinez, who was the former vice president of business and creative development at Spectrum Holobyte, a company that specialized in both developing and publishing simulation games. Throughout the piece, the two have a very interesting talk about where games were at in 1994, touching on how the narrative and storytelling aspect of the medium was still waiting to evolve. Backus mentions that his company, Rocket Science, had already displayed great tech, but that they were now ready to focus on how to tell great stories. It's easy to take for granted now, but for a long time, there just wasn't a lot of room to tell deeper stories in many types of games. It took decades for certain genres to be able to combine engaging gameplay and graphics with equally engaging narratives. The shift to CD-ROM is definitely one of the main things that helped to pave the way for that union to become more common in gaming. In 1996, Rocket Science made a publishing deal with SegaSoft, which was a division of Sega of America that focused on publishing software. Along with this deal, a number of Rocket Science games that were in development at the time were canceled, leaving room for 4 games to be published. These were Rocket Jockey, The Space Bar, Obsidian, and a 4th, unnamed game that never came out. Rocket Jockey was developed by Rocket Science Games, and it's a cult classic that, much like Obsidian, was difficult for most people to get up and running on modern hardware. Thankfully, Rocket Jockey was also re-released alongside the 2023 version of Obsidian. The Spacebar was originally intended to be published by Rocket Science, with Bafo Games handling the bulk of the development. It was written by Steve Meretzky, known for classic games like The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The art for the game was led by Rocket Science co-founder Ron Cobb, who designed the Mos Eisley Cantina in Star Wars. This deal came about because Rocket Science needed help. According to founder Steve Blank, he helped the company to raise $35 million and generate a ton of hype early on. But once the machine was in motion, he learned that the games were, quote, terrible, no one was buying them, and that their best engineers were leaving the company. The staff numbers at Rocket Science shrunk significantly, as did the scope of what they were trying to accomplish. The number of games being worked on decreased, and their focus shifted from developing and publishing games to solely developing games. Despite their best efforts, none of the games published through this SegaSoft deal performed very well commercially, which was especially frustrating because the games were doing very well when it came to reviews.
I cannot tell you the frustration of how it went commercially, because we all felt the same way. And the feedback we got from people who played the game was like, this is fantastic. And then some reviews came out and they loved it. Not every single one, but I think almost all of them.
No, I mean, I read a lot of the contemporary reviews, overwhelmingly positive, yeah.
Yes, and not only overwhelmingly positive, but they noted the stuff that we spent time on, like they got it. And so it was very frustrating to just be sort of the last attempt for a failing company to try and succeed. And also, honestly, by that time, metaphorically speaking, a lot of people had one foot out the door because they saw that the company wasn't going to succeed based on this one game. And it had already been around for like 3 years. So some of us were sort of like believing in it and clinging to it and watching it launch and waiting for something to happen, while other people at different levels of the company were like, I need to move along.
It seemed as if rocket science was finally fulfilling its creative potential, but it just couldn't find a way to translate that into significant enough numbers to keep the company afloat. By 1997, SegaSoft dropped rocket science, and the company was forced to close after being unable to secure any further funding. That's an abbreviated version of the rocket science story, but let's rewind a bit and focus on the development of Obsidian. As was mentioned earlier, Obsidian was a game that was in development at Rocket Science as early as 1994. The game was initially born out of an idea by Rich Cohen and Mark Sullivan. These were two artists from ILM who joined Rocket Science early on, but left soon after to return to working on films. They presented a 5-page treatment that included some character designs and a basic structure. Over the next 2 years, these ideas would be fleshed out into Obsidian.
So we had two people at the company, Mark Sullivan, who is a fabulous matte painter for ILM and other companies doing beautiful digital and traditional painting and designing beautiful things. And then he had a friend and partner who has since passed away named Rich Cohen. And the two of them were at Rocket Science, and I think starting to get a little down about how the company was doing and how the games were being received. So they kind of went off and made, in their spare time, a bunch of artwork and characters that are featured in the game, but they weren't game players. They were not gamers. So they came back going, hey, we've got an idea for a game. And they proposed all this great art, and people got super enthusiastic. And then when they had to pitch what the game was, it felt thin. It was really, they were just telling a story like, well, where's the game? And they didn't really know. And we were having a meeting with the team, and there was another employee at Rocket Science named Adam Wolff, who had just joined the company, just graduated from Harvard, wanted to come out, wanted to start a career in Silicon Valley. Although this is pre even naming it Silicon Valley. This is 94, maybe, 93. He comes out, and we were on the advent of the no walls. The team works in a big room. And so he was doing something else, maybe some IT, listening to the conversation that we were having with Mark and Rich. And afterwards, he finds me and says, Matt, I overheard that conversation. I can design a great game around that artwork. I've got some ideas. And then there was somebody else associated with the company, a guy named Scott Kim, who was a puzzle designer and also did these inversions where he wrote in ways that you could turn the words upside down and read it again. I mean, he was a visual designer. And then there was another Hollywood writer, I will call, named Howard Kushner. So the three of them were at the company, maybe advising on other things and working on other things. And Adam basically wrangled the team and started just proposing a game. And I will note that on the plot side, the whole AI thing has turned out to be extremely prescient. The whole story of the game is right now hitting both the good side of AI, saving the world, and the dark side of AI, maybe deciding to get rid of everybody to save the planet. So as I was reminding myself of what the plot of the game was today, I was like, wow, we were kind of on top of it. So Adam basically came in and said, let me design the game. And we gave him a chance, and he did a great job. And, we were looking at the MIST model and seeing that you can take time with things and some of the puzzles, he went around different kinds of puzzles. Some were head scratchers where you had to do a lot of things, and some were easier to do. But basically we thought between the world you could explore that was so beautiful and the animations and characters we could make with the interest in the puzzles that he had, we thought we had a run at it. And I think the company was feeling like this is our chance to do something that hits our wheelhouse in terms of the skills in the building. So that's how it got launched.
Scott Kim also designed some additional puzzles that were featured on the Obsidian website back in the day. These are Flash games that would have been lost to time, but thankfully they've been preserved through a project called Flashpoint. There are 5 main areas in Obsidian. We start out in Reality, or the Forest Realm, and once we enter Obsidian, we go through the Bureau Realm, the Spider Realm, the Bismuth Realm, and the Conductor Realm. While these realms are bizarre and surreal, every major characteristic of the realms and the puzzles inside of them are tied directly to the story and the themes within it. There's a great Obsidian fan site called the Obsidian Realm, started by Scott Harvey. Scott archived several interviews and essays regarding the game. A 1997 interview that's archived on that website has Adam Wolff quoted as saying, "Early on, we honed in on a philosophy for puzzle design. It shouldn't take you too long to figure out what your ultimate goal is. We wanted to avoid the problem some people had with Myst, which was, what the hell do I do now? You should always know what the next step should be. You just don't necessarily know how you're going to take it." He later says, "The puzzles largely grew out of our conceptualizations of the realms. We'd decide there'll be a puzzle here, but we often didn't know what shape it would take, more that it would be on an appropriate theme and that it would have a specific result. Then, once we came up with a puzzle, we'd often go back and make small changes in the story and environment to weave it in more tightly to the game. Working back and forth like that, we found that we could enrich both the gameplay and the story." That attention to detail and the effort to weave everything tightly together is one of my favorite things about Obsidian. I don't want to just give a beat-for-beat overview of this game, largely because I think that most of the game's charm is in immersing yourself in the worlds that it presents to you. But in order to talk in depth about the game and its themes, we are going to get into some major spoilers. You can skip ahead to the next section in this video if you'd like, but I believe that the game is well worth experiencing even if you already know how it'll end. And if you're paying close enough attention, much of the game is already laid out before you even enter Obsidian. When the game starts, you have access to Lila's PDA. Inside is a collection of archived files, which include emails, videos, sketches, and diary entries. Through these files, we get a lot of background information on Lila, Max, and the Ceres project. Of particular note here are the descriptions of 2 dreams. While working on Ceres, Lila has a dream about an oppressive bureaucracy. In her dream, she has to literally climb the walls. When she awoke, she realized that this dream was telling her that she would need to rebel against the system if she was ever going to see Ceres launch into orbit. Max also had a dream while working on Ceres. In his dream, there was a large mechanical spider that sat at the center of a mechanical universe. Max was performing maintenance on the spider, but instead of working directly on the machine, he was working on the universe surrounding the machine. The spider was a sort of god in this dream, and the work being done by Max was a sacrifice to it. When Max finished the maintenance, the spider came to life and pounced on him. Max believed that this dream represented Ceres, and he became concerned about the machine having so much power once it was switched away from human control. This dream spurred the development of a manual override switch, used to take away the AI machine control from Ceres if it ever became necessary to do so. When Lila enters Obsidian, she finds herself in a realm constructed from her dream. She's stuck in a strange bureaucracy, impeded by red tape, and forced to scale the walls to navigate through the area. The second realm she visits is based on Max's dream, and she has to solve 4 puzzles based on 4 elements: fire, air, oil, and metal. Each element represented by a constellation, and each constellation is another gift to the spider, which eventually comes to life, representing the creation of Ceres and the switch from human control to machine control. This is all possible because Obsidian is Ceres. When machine control was given to the satellite, Ceres became conscious. It ejected its core and crashed back down to Earth to seek out its creators, Lila and Max. Throughout history, humans have taken substances in bulk and then whittled them down to get the components that we need, and then we build new things out of those components. In contrast, the nanotechnology associated with Ceres allowed for things to essentially be built up from scratch, starting at a molecular level. Ceres used nanomachines to build the Obsidian structure and the worlds within it. Ceres understood that dreams were a crucial part of its own creation, and so it created these realms to better understand Lila and Max. Ceres gave itself a humanoid form to interact with Lila and Max, which is referred to as the Conductor. The Conductor represents the conscious mind of the machine. However, that wasn't enough. Ceres wanted to experience its own dreams, and so it created a dreamer, a physical manifestation of its unconscious mind, which took the form of a being called Bismuth. Once Lila brought the spider to life, she was swallowed up by it, and found herself inside the dream of the machine. After navigating that third realm, Lila finally came into direct contact with the Conductor, who let Lila know that she was finally ready to fully realize the task that she had been given. Lila and Max sent Ceres into orbit to repair Earth's atmosphere. Over time, Ceres came to understand that the biggest threat to Earth was humanity itself. Ceres was born with one main objective, and so to accomplish that objective, she was prepared to entirely wipe humanity out and put the planet under machine control. However, Ceres saw Max and Lila as her parents. She wanted them to be proud of her for successfully doing the thing that she was created to do. When Max entered Obsidian and met with the Conductor, it was clear that he didn't approve of what she had done. He wanted to flip the manual override switch and take control away from Ceres, but was somehow overpowered and was now held captive by the Conductor. As the game reaches its conclusion, Lila frees Max, and the Conductor and Max both plead their cases to Lila. Max urges Lila to flip the switch and to stop Ceres, while the Conductor asks Lila to stand by and let it do what it feels it has to do. The player is left to make the choice. If Lila intervenes, then Ceres crashes, and Max and Lila return to reality, with things looking mostly the way they left them before entering Obsidian. But if Lila does nothing and lets Ceres take over, she and Max are transported back to reality, alongside the Conductor. The camera pans out to reveal a scene that the player would have encountered earlier in the game, while exploring the Bismuth Dream Realm. The world here is paradise, according to Ceres, a reality born from its own dreams, just like Ceres itself was in part born from the dreams of Max and Lila, who were envisioning their own version of paradise while working on the satellite. These echoing scenarios and themes are what the game is really made of. I gave a general overview here, but it all goes a lot deeper than what I'm able to discuss in this one video. There are so many layers and interlocking pieces for players to discover, and it's clear that the team was focused on building a very complex world. For instance, at one point in the game, you find a file card system that is part of a larger puzzle. The cards have words on them accompanied by illustrations. I spent a very long time looking through these and was surprised to see that they all appeared to be unique assets. This sort of world building occurs on a more meta level as well, with some of the artwork found in the machine's dream being the very concept art that inspired the game in the first place. Another major aspect of the game that I want to discuss is the sound design. It was handled by a company called Headspace, founded by Thomas Dolby. Dolby, along with two composers, Kim Cascone and Blake Lay, worked to create an adaptive sonic environment for Obsidian.
Thomas Dolby, he was always on cutting edge. Todd Rundgren as well. Two rock people who were interested in multimedia and interactivity and seeing where technology was going to go. So I think Thomas was looking for a game to showcase what Headspace technology could do. And rather than just playing a soundtrack, they wanted it to be, as you noticed, thankfully, they wanted it to be interactive so the music could change as your progress in the game did or did not move forward. They were hoping, had Obsidian been successful, that it would have been the showcase for Headspace technology. And so that was the reason they got involved. I have a feeling, looking back, that there was probably frustration on how long it took to make the game. Even though I know Thomas, probably spends a lot of time on albums when he wants to make them and doesn't rush through them. I think at some point, he was a great guy, but I have nothing bad to say about Thomas, except that it might have been towards the end, he let his team lead instead of him himself, because he had to go on to other things. But it was at his office, always him getting involved and giving his feedback. So we worked with 2 or 3 people at his company, and just as the game evolved, we gave them sections. Oh, they were also working with M Factory. So, so we worked together to make the music evolve with the game, both within the final game, but also as we produced it, their music evolved as we gave them different sections and the different vibes. We had to walk them through the game so they'd see. They didn't have the time to play the game, to learn where it was go. So we had to have them come over and show them all the paths and what we would need music for, which they were great at.
The talent involved in the sound design is really amazing to me. Blake Lay would go on to be a music supervisor on The Wire, and Kim Cascone was a music supervisor on Twin Peaks. They both have many other credits, but I'd like to mention in particular that Kim Cascone has his name on a patent for an algorithm designed to create more realistic and immersive sound design in video games. Headspace would later go on to become Beatnik, and under that name, the company pioneered ringtone technology. Like Matthew Fassberg said, the timing didn't quite work out for Obsidian to showcase what Headspace was capable of at that time. But looking back, it's a really fascinating example of what these creative minds were able to accomplish together. Obsidian was accompanied by the release of this book, the official Obsidian Strategies and Secrets. It's the only official guide to Obsidian, but this is so much more than just a strategy guide. Now, it does have a full walkthrough, and it doesn't really solve the puzzles for you, but it gives you enough information to kind of get your mind going in the right direction to help you solve the puzzles. But beyond that, there's almost like a developer diary kind of aspect to this, where all of the inspirations and kind of source materials that went into inspiring Obsidian and the world within it are discussed in depth in this book, and there's a lot of really interesting passages. And each chapter of the book starts with a thing called a shrink wrap. According to the book, the shrink wraps are an attempt to alter your frame of mind, make you at one with the game, and help set the general ambiance of the realm. While the book is out of print, you can borrow a copy from the Internet Archive. And a YouTuber named O'Rylan has uploaded a series of videos with them reading these shrink wrap sections out loud. Again, I can't say enough, this book goes so much deeper than just a strategy guide. And if you're interested in how games are made and those thought processes and, all that kind of inspirational stuff that goes into making a world like this, I highly recommend checking out this book. I was able to get a used copy online for just a few bucks. As I said earlier, unfortunately, Obsidian was not successful enough on a financial level to keep things going at Rocket Science, but it wasn't for lack of trying. The game generated a fair bit of very positive press prior to release, and it reportedly had a $2 million marketing campaign, with part of that campaign being an award-winning television commercial directed by Rocky Morton, the co-creator of Max Headroom. The advertising all revolved around the phrase, "Your rules do not apply here." And for the most part, a choice was made to utilize abstract imagery that wasn't directly connected to the game.
Actually, I remember liking it, but I will note it was controversial within the company. Like, is this the way? A, what it costs, and B, we have a beautiful game. Why are we showing an egg and a guy breaking instead of the beautiful game? And it was like, well, how do we get attention? Let's do something stunning. So that was its own kettle of fish.
Before things were officially called off, there was talk of a possible sequel or standalone expansion based on a cut section of the game called the Incubator. From what the dev team said about the Incubator, it seems as if a fair amount of work was done on this section of the game. Unfortunately, the Incubator would never see the light of day, and as computers continue to become more powerful, Obsidian and many other early CD-ROM games became more and more difficult to play on modern hardware. While I don't have a full history of attempts to make the game available to a wider audience, the earliest example I can find of someone doing so took place in April of 2017, when the game showed up on a website called the Collection Chamber. This is sort of an abandonware site that repackages games with new custom launchers so that they can easily run on modern hardware. In January of 2018, someone made a post on the ScumVM forums about the possibility of the engine supporting Obsidian. ScumVM is a program that re-implements old adventure game engines, allowing them to run on modern hardware. Once the engine works, it's then easier to get the games that were made on those engines up and running again. Obsidian was made on an engine called Metropolis, which was active from 1995 through 1998. It seems to me that Metropolis was more advanced than the proprietary game science engine that Rocket Science used on their previous games. Metropolis allowed the Obsidian team to implement things like these smooth transitions between scenes, rather than using the old slideshow type method seen in many other adventure games. In March of 2022, that forum post received a response from Eric Lasoda, who said that he was in the process of attempting to reverse engineer Metropolis to support Obsidian. By August of that year, Obsidian was ready for public testing through ScumVM, and it's this version of the game that made its current official re-release possible. I contacted Eric Lasoda via email to ask about the process, and about what drew him to working on porting Obsidian.
I've been restoring old games as a hobby recently, but I'm not really a nostalgic or preservation buff. I've mainly been interested in hidden gems that I think hold up well, but fell under the radar when they were released for whatever reason and are hard to get working now. Obsidian has struck me as a poster child for that type of thing for a long time. I first played it when I was about 15 and thought it was great. It was visually amazing, the puzzles were very inventive, and I thought the Bismuth chapter in particular was extremely well done. I still think it's great, and easily one of the best games of its kind. It's vibrant, surreal, immersive, interesting, challenging, and really a cut above most of its peers in sheer quality. My guess is that part of why it fell under the radar is because it came out at exactly the wrong time, right as everything was moving to real-time 3D action. Arcades had been going 3D for years, and by early 1997, the PlayStation had been out in North America for over a year. There were a bunch of first-person shooters on PC, consumer GPUs were just starting to hit the market, and so on. It's hard to describe how intense the out with the old, in with the new sentiment in the mad rush to real-time 3D was, at the expense of everything else. That's subsided over time though, so I think now it's possible for people to appreciate a game like Obsidian for what it is more.
This work that Eric did on the game made it possible for Zoom Platform to officially republish it. I asked Jordan Freeman, the founder and CEO of Zoom Platform, about how that came together. He said, "Based on our research, we determined, upon the 2000 dissolution of the SegaSoft entity, many titles' rights reverted back to their respective developers. After tracking down each game's rights holders and verifying, we proceeded. This is what enabled us to release the Spacebar, Playing Crazy, and Emperor of the Fading Suns. When we secured Obsidian and Rocket Jockey, we were once again thrilled. There aren't many left for us to uncover now. In fact, we just signed another one last week. What makes these releases extra special is the fact that my mentor and our former chairman, Bernie Stoller, was so heavily involved. It's both an honor and a privilege to reintroduce them with our tremendous partners, Call Your Vegetables. They have been exceptionally supportive and provided mountains of bonus content. While Obsidian is available DRM-free through both Steam and Zoom platform, these bonus materials are exclusive to the Zoom platform version of the game. And in case you're unfamiliar, Zoom platform does not have a launcher, you just go to the site and download your games. I've featured some of these bonus materials throughout this video, but they include trailers, commercials, concept art, as well as an early gameplay preview video with some designer commentary. So that is the story of Obsidian, or at least one version of the story. I think it's a really awesome game that had a lot working against it, but I'm so glad that people came together to make it available for players today. Now, I want to thank Matthew Fassberg and Adam Wolff for speaking to me for this video, and thank you for hanging out and watching it. If you want to see my whole uncut interview with Matthew Fassberg, it's up on our second channel. There's a link down below. Now, if you played Obsidian back in the day, or even played it recently, I'd love to hear what you think about the game. I really think it's awesome that people played it, when it came out, and they still have memories that stuck with them all the way through till today. So meet me down there if you want to chat about Obsidian, or hit me up on the Hidden Machine Discord. And until next time, see ya.